This series, which is called Gateway to the Holocaust, is painful to deliver because there's so few people who have capitalized upon what the great prophet Yeshayah, Isaiah, revealed in the 17th and 18th chapters regarding the imposition of a two-state destruction of Israel and how this would happen, why it would happen, who would cause it to happen, most importantly, when it would happen. And it is astonishing that a prophet can be that specific and it not resonate with God's people. I've been trying to explain to Israel that this Fakistinian state is going to be imposed upon you, and it's going to happen prior to, we just had a crash of our computer here. Oh, brought it back. I don't know what happened. Maybe we'll get it. Anyway, we have a camera stuck behind a teleprompter here that enables me to read the passages from Yeshayah that I will be citing, and it just went black, but it came back up, so that's a good sign. Anyway, with me constantly telling all who would listen that this is going to happen prior to the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles, which according to the prophet Yeshayah begins with the 22nd of May, 2026, 7 years prior to our king Daud's return with Yahweh in 2033, which is exactly 2,000 years after he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim in 33 CE, and 3,000 years after the cornerstone was set for the house of Yahweh's name called the temple. 4,000 years from the time that Abraham and Yishak affirmed what Daud would do on Mount Moriah. God has a very clear schedule of all of these events. And so I began to share that this was going to happen, when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen. And yet all you get is yawns. And this is the most transformational event of our lifetimes. One of the most transformational events in the history of the world is going to be the imposition of an Islamic state carved out of the heart of Israel for the myth of the Palestinians. And Yeshayah told us all about it. Before we go into that, though, I want to share some thoughts that I have posted on X and Facebook this morning, which is the history of this myth of the Palestinians. Palestine is really nothing more than a variation of what we call the N-word. It is an ethnic slur. It is not a national identity. It's not a racial identity. It is simply a ethnic slur. And the history of this ethnic slur goes back to Hadrian, who was a ruthless Roman emperor who sought to not only destroy the province of Yehuda, Judah, but to torture Jews to death. And while he was abusing them, killing them in mass, torturing them, he wanted to slander them. And in the midst of this, while he was burning literate Jews alive with copies of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms wrapped around them, getting his jollies out of such sadistic abuse, he kept on pondering. So what is the most dreaded name in those writings of yours that you would most disrespect? And someone blurted out the Philistines, because they were such ruthless savages, and how they were invaders and that they terrorized Jews for a considerable period of time until Daud finally bested them. And he said, that's great. Now, from here on, Judah, Yehuda, is going to be called Philistina after the Palestinians, these Philistines. Now, he knew that by 133 CE, when he did this, that they didn't exist anymore. He knew that because he had studied history, that the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and finally the Macedonian Greeks had eliminated them. They, unlike most people, were so savage they could not be enslaved. They made Laodiceans slaves, so they simply killed them all. Total extermination of the Philistines. He knew that was the case, but by renaming Judea Philistia and starting the myth of Palestine, it was a grotesque racial slur to demonize the victims of genocide. And that's how it all began. And after doing this and having killed hundreds of thousands of Jews, crucifying many of them, torturing many of them to death, starving many of them, Hadrian, showing his true colors, took his boy toy. Yes, every time he went on a campaign, he had a child, a boy, that he ravaged. The great love of his life was to have sex with, in a pedophile fashion, with a child, homosexual in this case. And he took him to Greece, where Hadrian officiated as a leader of the Dionysus cult, as they celebrated what became Easter week, where Dionysus is alleged to have died and been resurrected. And it's celebrated each year as such. It's what gives the divine luster to the character of Jesus in the New Testament, who is otherwise a crude counterfeit of David, the actual Messiah and Son of God, but he's turned into a dying and resurrecting God because of the application of this Dionysus religious bent, of which Hadrian officiated. This is the birth of Palestine. So after losing their first two wars with the newly established state of Israel in 1968, after the 1948 and 1967 wars of independence and then the Six-Day War, Marxists and Muslims met in Cairo. It was the Muslim Brotherhood and the KGB. And the purpose was to create a Muslim Marxist scheme to do to Israel what weapons of war would not do. And the Russians were involved, the KGB, because they were supplying most of the arms to the Muslims who were twice defeated now by the upstart Jewish state. And so they had a vested interest in all of this. And collectively, they resurrected the ethnic slur of Philistia and called everybody that was a Muslim in Judea, in Israel, a Philistine, a Palestinian. And then they stole the flag of the Jordanians, which is most of these people lived, and took the star off of it, and that became the flag of terror. And they used this resurrection of an ethnic slur for a single purpose: to perpetrate genocide against Jews and to extinguish and eliminate Israel via a series of intifadas. All the while, it's interesting that they appointed a easily compromised Marxist Muslim in Yasser Arafat because, well, like Hadrian, he was also gay. And so they had total control over him for this purpose. And he was their leader of the PLO. And the purpose, of course, was to mix Marxism and Muslims to eradicate Israel. 1968 is when it occurred. And what's astonishing today is that young people across America and in Europe have been so indoctrinated by progressive propaganda that they're incapable of thinking. And they are promoting this same Marxist Muslim agenda that rose in 1968. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, he was Yasser Arafat's lapdog. He was constantly shown sitting in Arafat's lap as they had communist, Muslim, and anti-Christian signs and slogans all over them and around them. It's all a plot, an ethnic slur. And you not only have two generations really of young people so indoctrinated in progressive crap that they are out enraged and calling for the victims of Marxist Muslim genocide to receive genocide, to be the victims. The victims are becoming victimized. You have Muslims who are so indoctrinated by the worst book ever written in the Quran, the most savage anti-Semitic tome, far more anti-Semitic and savage than Mein Kampf, lapping it up if it were Kool-Aid from their ungod. And that's where we find ourselves. And we find now that Qatar and Saudi Arabia, having provided massive bribes to the UK, France, Spain, Portugal, Norway, countries throughout Europe, and having bought themselves a president with $16.5 billion in bribes to Trump and company, are in a position to impose what is a temporary solution. If you're foolish enough to think that Muslims want a state for Palestinians, you'd be sadly mistaken. They know that there is no such thing as a Palestinian. They know that it is a Marxist Muslim plot. And they know that the people who bear that title are malicious and murderous. And every place they have gone, they have been destructive. That's why they're, even with stunning amounts of wasteland in Saudi Arabia and plenty of money, they won't take them. That's why Egypt, even with Israel giving them back the Sinai after the 1967 Six-Day War, have the largest, most imposing wall to keep them out of the Sinai. And so it goes that we're within a week of the United Nations pursuing the creation of a Palestinian state. And it's not to establish an independent homeland for a non-existent ethnicity. It is to be used, and that's its only purpose amongst Marxists and Muslims. It is to be used to destroy Israel. That's its purpose. And if you're an Israeli and are going along with this plot and believe that it is your best hope of living in peace, then you're an idiot. Now, there's a lot of them in Israel because 25% of the population are progressives, and therefore they are the Marxists that are responsible for this. And 25% are ultra-Orthodox or Haredi, and they're nothing but parasites. So it's not surprising that Israel is tearing itself apart. And part of the problem is that Israel chose the wrong tactic to defend itself against what happened on 10/7. And I said it at the time, that by going into Gaza and blowing up Gaza and thinking that you're going to solve this by attacking Hamas, that all you're going to do is make a bad situation worse. You're going to manufacture far more people who hate you than you're going to kill. And that's exactly what's happened. Probably 10-1. And you're going to turn world opinion against Israel. And that's what's happened. There was a much better way to go about this, and I laid out a 5-point plan. And the first part of that, of course, is to recognize that the primary enemy that is attacking Israel is Islam, and that it's being championed by progressives. And that alliance needed to be exposed. There needed to be a thorough discussion of what I've just shared. Well, returning now to the prophecy. Well, Shabuah is going to be the last opportunity to leave this planet alive before it spins out of control and anti-Semitic rage. A great deal is going to occur between May 22nd, 2026, and the 1st of Abib, which is April 4th in 2030, which is when the witnesses arrive to confront the Torahless one and encourage Yehudim to participate in the final Lakot gleaning on Towrah. So as we contemplate what Yeshaya, Isaiah, reveals next, since it flows out of the previous revelations, let's consider them together. And I'm really glad that we have this opportunity to rejoin by considering the prophecy from the beginning. So this will put everything in context for you. A prophetic pronouncement and timely declaration regarding the removal of the tremendous burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is revolting and corrupt, degenerate and unrestrained, and will be removed from among inhabited cities. It will actually become a twisted and tangled heap of collapsed structures and fallen buildings, as well as rubble. Abandoned and damned, destroyed and deserted will be the inhabitants of the terrorized regions of anguished cities filled with disgusting religious temples and shrines, as well as wrathful donkeys, particularly of Aurora, the repudiated outcasts who are repugnant refugees of the Arnon Valley and Ammon, Jordan. For there will be roaming animals fighting in militant militias, along with their helpers, but they will cease and prostrate themselves because eventually there will be no one left to terrorize. This is Yeshaya, Isaiah 17, 1 and 2. So the fortified city and defensive structures will cease as a result of Ephraim, Israel, along with the government out of Damascus, including the residue left of Aram, Syria, including some of the military influence over Iran, Iraq, and Jordan, for being similarly vehement and burdensome, fanatical, and dim-witted. The children of Israel, individuals who engage and endure with God, will actually continue to exist, prophetically declares Yahweh, of the vast array of spiritual messengers and envoys. And it will actually transpire that in that day, that her size, that of Jacob, Israel, will be decreased to the point of no longer being sustainable or viable. The fattest, best protected, and most important place in her midsection of her physical existence will be leaned and wastefully sacrificed as part of the sickening agenda of world leaders. Isaiah 17:4. Then there will exist something which can be compared to the collecting and bringing about of an intensely dramatic ingathering, the removal and receiving of a harvest, a reaping during a short but vexing time of standing grain, deeply rooted, steadfast, upright, and established. Then his Zeroah, the one who is cultivating the seed sown for his harvest to become fruitful and productive, will reap this harvest with unfolding implications, cutting the valued crop away from a troubling time. This of first fruits, forming an overflowing torrent, moving swiftly from one place to another in linear fashion as a result of this stem off of the main branch. In addition, there will be a time certain that which is similar to a rapid gleaning of what is left in a final ingathering to be quickly prepared and removed, a lakot. This of first fruits flowing from one place to another in linear fashion in the profound depths of Raphaim, where the sick have been healed and the defective have been restored, while the feeble still falter and the souls of the dead remain. Isaiah 17:5. Now this brings us to the most amazing installment of the prophecy pursuant to our time. Yeshaya's insights will take us into a place none of us could have imagined, and yet they have all been here for us to read for 27 centuries. So up to this point, we know that the government of Syria would fall. That was predicted, and it has happened. We know that buildings in Damascus and surrounds will be reduced to twisted rubble. According to satellite imagery, 106,000 buildings fit that description in and around Damascus, with 26,000 of them being in Damascus itself. Prophecy fulfilled. That this uprising will be a people who prostrate themselves and yet of terrorists. Prophecy fulfilled. That they will include those who call themselves refugees and outcasts, who are part of these asses in and around Ammon, Jordan. Prophecy fulfilled. And that ultimately they will kill all the terrorists that are available to be killed, and they will turn their attention on Israel, and Israel's going to do its best to preclude an attack. And so it is Ephraim, Israel, that participates in this prelude. And that as a result of all of this, the world is going to force Israel to surrender its heart, cutting a terrorist state right out of the core of the nation of Israel, rewarding those who perpetrated the rapes and abductions and murders of October 7th. Doesn't even seem plausible, but yet that is where we are, and now it's inevitable. That's the way prophecy is. It says, and he will remain, enduring, being left behind as flesh and blood. Speaking now of the Zeroah, that he is going to be left behind, remaining as flesh and blood, for having caused people with physical bodies to be spared as a remnant, Sharar. Then acting as kin in a close relationship, he, speaking of the Zeroah, will stay behind, his body serving as a reminder for the remainder of the extended family who are still leavened, a remnant of blood relations left over and remaining as physical beings. This is written identically to Sha'or, which is leavened, Sha'ar, which is remnant, remainder, and residue, and Sharir, physical body comprised of flesh and blood, a corporeal mass, blood and meat. It was written in the Niphal perfect, third person, masculine, singular. It's a singular male individual who is the Zeroah. And in the Niphal stem, it means that he will both carry out what is being described on behalf of the remnant, and he will suffer the effects that are being presented. And it's going to happen in a very decisive moment in time. And this says during it, which is during this very process, means concurrent with the final lakot, this gleaning. Thrust aside and left on the stems and branches, as would be the case of an olive tree when beaten from all around to shake off the last of its fruit. 2 or 3 mature olives in the top most critical and foremost branches. That would be Yehudim. The vocal branch who speaks, promises, and relates identifies that there will be 4 or 5 in the clefts of his crag with his branches which have been broken off. In the crevasses, fissures, and cracks of a crag, the secondary branches which have been lopped off and separated, speaking of both the Zeroah named crag and also of the tribes of Israel who have been cut off, which would be the 10 tribes in addition to Israel, Yehudim. Of the fruitful, coming by way of the fruitful and productive heifer, of the one cultivating a flourishing and abundant harvest on behalf of future generations. Parah prophetically declares, Yahweh, God of Israel. Isaiah 17:6. I'm certain that you notice that Shabuah is a katsar, and that means it's a harvest. It is followed by Teruah 7 years later. After all, Shabuah means 7, which is a lakat, a gleaning. The promise of 7s will materialize at the outset of the time of Yisrael's troubles with a shimmering stream of souls leaving an anguished planet for a joyous experience in Shamaim on the Shabat of May 22nd, 2026, which is when Shabuah will be fulfilled. Then, as the Ha-eth Shar, Yaakov, which is the time of Israel's troubles, comes to a frantic and horrific close as a consequence of the adversary's manipulations, of this Marxist Muslim agenda against God's people, a final few will be withdrawn on trumpets, the day of the herald, a Friday evening at sunset, September 23rd, 2033, with yet another stream of light headed out of harm's way. Now, on this day and thereafter, as part of Teruah, there will be an Oliyah caused by the choder stem when whacking away at the olive tree for this final gleaning. In addition to the olives which are gleaned, there will be 7 olives thrust aside and left on the branches. They will not be part of the lakat. And since this was prefaced by Sha'ar, we know that they will remain in physical bodies while the Zeroah will be reduced to flesh and blood, all as the sun rises and the full light of Teruah is manifest. Sound the shofar. But more on this momentarily. Now, also interesting, as a play of words, Yashaya affirmed the obvious. The choder is a mirror. He is a bit verbose. He is also a crag, with the cracks and crevices to show his age and the battle scars earned along the way. And while we have known that the Zeroah is fruitful as a result of the actionable root of this title being Zerah, sowing seeds, so there can be cultivated and grow into a productive harvest. This is the first time that the one cultivating the Moedim of Katsir has been identified as a parah, a productive heifer. And that there is some extraordinary implications regarding this. I haven't shared this previously, but since Yeshaya Called the final Zeroah an Emir talkative stick, it is germane to this conversation to reveal that Par, bull, was written Pe Rosh. These letters are found among the final 6 in the Hebrew alphabet. They mean that the come lately will be a man, known for his big head and big mouth. Yahweh's Par listens. He observes, he thinks, and then he speaks. That is why he is called the coal voice of God. It is also insightful to reveal that Parah, the one who is fruitful, is scribed Pe Rosh He, which is presented in the original script of the Torah as something that affirms that the heifer is human because the He is a man standing up, pointing up to God. This productive and fruitful bull has a harvest that is exceptionally vocal because the first letter is the Pe is in the form of a mouth. And of course, the Rosh is a thinking and observant person presented as their head. Therefore, this is an exceptionally vocal, observant, and thoughtful man who takes a stand to point the way to God. That is a parah. In his final stand in this role, he is dubbed the red heifer. But that's like calling Dode a lamb when fulfilling Passover. He fulfilled the role of the lamb, but he was very much a man, and it was a man's corporeal body, a bashar, that suffered Roman crucifixion to fulfill Passover in 33 CE. Likewise, Yahweh is using the metaphor of the red heifer because the man from Edom, this final Zeroah, Yada, at this moment, he is going to be bloody red. He is a man of the earth, and he is bullish in his approach to the word of God and to protecting God's people and trampling out all manner of demons and serpents. And he is productive, exceedingly fruitful in his ways. That's why it's used this way. As is the case with almost every word sharing the par root of bull, para, which we will confront as we make our way through the Torah from Bamidbar 19 to Numbers 5. It's one of the most interesting comparisons that there is in the Torah. It is the Adamah Parah, this red heifer, or bloody red man of the earth who is productive, that is sacrificed to cleanse and prepare the adulterous woman of Numbers 5, such that Israel is prepared to be betrothed to King Dode upon his return. And so, in this light, it is defined as to expose and to dismiss, to uncover and then absolve. And in this context, the red heifer's ensuing sacrifice on Towrah and on behalf of those left behind is to unbind and to discharge with payment remitted, to overlook a penalty otherwise due. Foreshadowing what the heifer will endure as we consider his ordeal in the 4th book of the Torah and Bamidbar Numbers. Parah speaks of bearing the skin and smashing away at it to offer it as compensation. It describes the nature of those bludgeoning the heifer to death, because Parah reveals that an unrestrained mob will be out of control. The related Paritz and Parek speak of the Choder's adversary, Hasatan, a savage and cruel creature who is violent and ravenous, a thief devoted to death. Sounds like Allah, doesn't it? And destruction in the most ruthless, barbaric, and brutal manner. These are Muslims. Of Satan's minions, Torah says that they are a brood of brats and swarming rabble, chaotic and violent youths. Sure seems like Yahweh was describing those who invaded Israel as Muslims to torment Jews. Then addressing the parah's positive traits, parah is used to describe a shoot or a stem which bears fruit, and of the leader who provides freedom. And in this regard, the related pari depicts a fruitful harvest of young offspring. Now, this may be why parah is defined as a bud which blossoms, addressing that which will happen to the Zeroah's nefesh, his soul, in the waning hours of Towrah. It will parah, fly away, making a linear motion through the air to Shamayim as his bashar body is incinerated, along with the adulterous woman of Israel's guilt. Now, parah, which means to release and let go, to cast off and to let run free and wild, totally emancipated in this context, would be reminiscent of let my people go. It speaks of the initiation of another Yatsa Exodus. This one back to the ultimate promised land, to the earth restored to the conditions of Gan Eden. Now, in this context, it is interesting to note that a paraz is a prince who governs, and he is a fighter who defends. When spelled with an aleph rather than the ain, para means to thrive, because one is fruitful. And while the tertiary definition of para is deduced from the feminine suffix added to par, bull, the actual meaning of the word is to be very productive and fruitful, cultivating offspring through an abundant harvest, which is this bull's purpose. To para is to cause others to sprout, blossom, flourish, and thrive while promoting their growth and maturity. Now, should anyone think that para, productive and fruitful heifer, was inadequate by itself to equate the events of Yom Teruah with the prophetic portrayal of the Adamah para, this bloody red and productive heifer, in Bamidbar 19, perhaps this next pronouncement will reinforce these conclusions. In that specific day, this man, Adam, this human descended from Adam, the masculine of Adamah, bloody red earth, will actually pay attention to, highly regard, and accept the Almighty, the one engaged and who acted to get this done, his maker. And his eyes will choose to continuously look toward the set apart one of Yisrael, Isaiah 17:7. In these words, Yahweh isn't suggesting that this gleaning, I should say, of the covenant's children during Teruah will cause mankind to regard and accept him, because for the next 10 days, most people will continue to reject him, favoring gods men have made rather than the creator of men. That is why he used Ha-Adam, the man, this man, rather than the more common terms for individuals, peoples, or mortals. Ha-Adam is a singular individual, a depiction which is common throughout the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, because the path to Yahweh is walked individually. Reinforcing this point, every reference to him, or his throughout this entire statement was written in the third person singular. But more to the point that Yahweh was making, there would be no missing the fact that he is introducing the Zeroah, cultivating the Teruah Lakat as a parah, a productive heifer. Therefore, God is introducing us to the other half of his title with Adam, the bloody red man, also known as Yada, who is now acting in the role of the red heifer. It is on this day, Yom Teruah, that the Adamah Parah's regard for Yahweh, his commitment to closely examine and carefully consider the Almighty's testimony, and his acceptance of God's plan and Mikra, will cause the Zeroah to act, doing what his father once done. And that's a tall order, since it is to deliberately choose to let his guard down, to dispatch the Malach that have been protecting him, to release the seven spirits of Yahweh, and to allow Hasatan to bludgeon him to death as a sacrificial offering, to cleanse and prepare the mortal remnant of Yisrael for God's return. Now, beyond this, Yada's focus will continue to be on the set-apart one of Yisrael, which is descriptive of his God and his king. So, with the last ounce of Yahweh's God-infused devotion, Yada will miraculously cleanse the people and the land and the region of politics and militancy, as well as religion. It will be an extraordinary day's work with exemplary results because of Yahweh's engagement and support. And speaking of results, we're reminded that Elia achieved something similar 2 millennia, 888 years ago, and that it served as a harbinger of what he will soon help orchestrate once again. So then he shall never accept or gaze upon the altars, these works of his hands, representing what his fingers have made. They will not focus upon that which is associated with the Asherahs, the mothers of gods, or the queens of heaven, nor the Madonnas with child. La Asherim, the blessed, the goddesses of grace, of good fortune, and pagan mythology, the blessed mother, the consort of the Lord Baal, which is Satan, and El, the god symbolized by the decorated tree and sacred wooden pillars, a popular pagan deity from the Babylonian, Assyrian, Phoenician, Armenian, and Canaanite mythology. The Mother Earth goddess upon which the Roman Catholic religious festival of Easter was conceived. The idol upon which the Madonna and child statues were built. The pole upon which the Christian cross was derived. The basis of the Christmas tree, the second person of the Christian Trinity, also known as Astarte and Ishtar, the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, worshipped as Venus in Rome, from Ashar, to pronounce blessed, to receive, to relieve suffering, to make happy, or the worship of sun god, images, Charam. These sun pillars and idolatrous pagan worship, which is inspired by the sun, will be no more. Yashayah, freedom from Yahweh, Isaiah 17:8. It will be forevermore as it once was during Eliah's humiliation and extermination of all things pertaining to the politicized religions. These have now evolved from the Asherahs and the worship of sun god images into Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And as we turn back the pages of time to our future and explore what the Torah reveals about tomorrow, all of this is relevant to where we're going. If you don't think it applies to Judaism, then why do you wear a circular disc kippah? Why do you have as the symbol of your religion and country a star? Why is Kabbalah so central to the religion of Judaism? And if you think it doesn't apply to Christianity, why are there halos? Why is there a Christmas tree? Why is there Christmas? Why is there Easter? Why are there steeples that catch the first and last rays of the sun? Why are all of these things as such? Now, as I was translating the prophecy regarding the bloody moon, I realized that I was going to be sacrificed by my adversary, the adversary, Satan, during the final day of the 42 months as the witness and Zeroah calling Yisrael and the world to Yahowah for the Teruah gleaning and the Kippurim homecoming. And at the time, I had thought that there was nothing more to this than my role as the bull of Shabuah. And now that Kippurim was over with my blood sprinkled on the mercy seat to allow Yisrael to approach God, well, no big deal. Who wouldn't give a little for the cause? Now, however, based upon Yeshayah's pronouncement, I know the day I will die. And I realize the reason that it matters. But before I decode what is currently the most discussed and least understood of the Torah's prophecies, that of the red heifer, I want to explain what is happening in Yeshayah 17, 4 through 6. Pulling back to see the bigger picture into which this prophecy will play out, we find that the consensus of world leaders will be that come to the conclusion that Muslims, moronically called Palestinians off the old Roman ethnic slur, who stand in a long line of Islamic terrorists who have been killing, raping, enslaving, and persecuting Jews since 622 CE, somehow deserve an autonomous state, even though incredulously Fakistan will have the same borders Muslims violently rejected. In the 1948 War of Independence, in the 1967 Six-Day War, in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, in the 1987 First Intifada, in the 1993 Oslo Accords and their breaches, in the 2005 Gaza disengagement, the 2002 Intifada, the 2023 Hamas massacre. Despite the grotesque and appalling immorality of rewarding mass murdering Muslims with a nation carved out of the heartland of the people that they have sought to annihilate. Yahowah confirmed 2,700 years ago that this insanity would occur, with many progressive Jews promoting their own demise. Now, once this occurs, especially in the most anti-Semitic climate in world history, and with 2 billion demonic Muslims surrounding Israel, calling for the nation's demise, Israel will begin fighting a losing battle, a deadly war for its very right to exist. and not wanting his covenant family to witness or endure the sadistic carnage, nor fall victim to it, Yahweh will be orchestrating the Shabuah harvest of standing grain on May 22, 2026, all in concert with the work of his Zeroah. 3.5 years later, on 1 Abib, April 4th in 2030, Yada is going to return with Elia as one of the two witnesses. Their mission will be to expose and condemn the adversary. Now, stirring the pot in corporeal form, all while denouncing religion and politics. At the same time, the two witnesses will be encouraging Jews to avail themselves of the Towrah olive lakot gleaning. This will be another opportunity to live forever. Now, by design, not everyone is going to be withdrawn. The choder, after beating the olive tree to glean its final fruit, will leave other olives, 2 or 3 on the top branch, Yehudim, and 4 or 5 protected in the fissures of the crag on the cut off branches, the Israelites. And their instructions will be to do as Yahweh specifies in Bamidbar, Numbers 19. Once I am tortuously and publicly sacrificed, my heart likely eaten, and some of my blood guzzled, all by the corporeal manifestation of Satan, as he exclaimed in his autobiography, Ezekiel. Of course, my body will be openly displayed for a moment as a trophy, which I realize will be on the Temple Mount overlooking the city of Daud. And I say this not only because of the prophecy, but because prior to this time, I will have cleansed Moriah of the nastiness of the dome of the rock and the mosque known as Alaska, sweeping away that rubbish. This is actually good news, as it conveys the fate that I will have chosen for reasons I hope you appreciate. Well, as we turn the page and we realize that we're entering a new day and age, a time where the internet instantly brings calamities home such that everyone around the globe can witness the unfolding events simultaneously. The 8 billion people who currently occupy this planet spend an average of just under 7 hours a day online, mostly on their smartphones. On this day, one the prophet Yeshaya, Isaiah, is describing, the world will be watching. Most will be in shock, trying to process what is transpiring. They had been assured by their leaders that the two-state solution would bring peace to the Middle East and to the world. But just like Neville Chamberlain's Peace in Our Time, it had the opposite effect. The images from countless cell phones and cameras are all now telling a different story. 100 million vociferous and barbaric Muslim militants equipped with billions of dollars worth of American weapons are going to be flooding into Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces have been gunning down wave after wave, creating mountains of dead bodies stretched out like the undulations of an angry sea. With Israel isolated and nearly indefensible, and with these murderous religious belligerents unrelenting, the tide will turn, and the tiny nation will be inundated. And yet, with the final solution to the Islamic Jewish problem finally in reach, every Islamic jihadist is going to be abruptly blown away, like tumbleweeds in a wind like none have ever seen before. In an instant, the combined destructive force of Islam will be completely annihilated as they try to invade a seemingly insignificant nation. What happens? What's next? The dire nature of Yeshayah's prophetic vision does not change as we move through the artificial chapter break between Yeshayah 17 and 18. But now, as we turn the page, Yahweh does something he does nowhere else in the Torah and prophets. Rather than naming the offensive country, God vividly describes the egregious nation in his prophetic warning, ostensibly because it would remain unknown for over 2,500 years after this was scribed. So while the identity of this place will soon become obvious, the timing of this transition from Islamic terrorism and Israel to a distinct land across the sea is intriguing and perhaps even more concerning for you, depending on where you might live. When Yahweh revealed that his spirit would blow away the invading Muslims out of Israel, he said that this was going to occur prior to an approaching storm. The regional conflict would be a prelude to world war, to even more devastation in the aftermath of the Islamic attempt to conquer and loot God's people. Therefore, in concert with what we have been given, we have every reason to suspect that the nation that instigated the Syrian war, the nation that has played the greatest role in giving large swaths of Israel to the Muslims heretofore, the nation that built the weapons that the Islamic nations will wield against Israel, is the very place which will act up again, pushing the rest of the world into war. Listen. Woe, alas, expressing dissatisfaction and a warning of impending doom, addressing the consequence of malicious yearnings and speech and the devastation and destruction it will bring. To the land, to the realm, nation, country, and place of whirling and hovering, of buzzing and swarming, the likeness and the image of a loud percussive flying weapon with vibrating and noisy metal components swirling around, which are used to devour and destroy, of the rhythmic clamor of a locust-like armaments which shadow over others, causing them to quiver in fear beneath. These are whirling and hovering wings, structures of a winged apparatus like a bird, which, relationally speaking, it is out of the region beyond Eber, the place situated across and on the opposite side of the world from the perspective of Israel. An arrogant and haughty place, an immoral place prone to furious outbursts born out of an improper attitude and bias. A meddling busybody with the propensity to invoke itself in the affairs of others, in the direction of the rivers of Cush, currently considered an unknown land, even though Cush is introduced in the Torah in association with Babylon and thus, by deduction, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers as they pass through northern Mesopotamia, or secondarily the Nile Delta. This is Yeshayah. Salvation is from Yahweh, Isaiah 18:1. We're now getting into the part where it becomes obvious. that the prophet is blaming the two-state solution and the weapons that are wielded against Israel when she is no longer defensible on America, the land of these whirling wings across the sea. Well, as a master of the obvious, few things are worse than being the object of a woe. You don't want to be the subject of a woe when God is speaking. And he is speaking here, he is addressing this nation of whirling wings, especially when the excruciating expression of intense dissatisfaction from God is a warning. It's the antithesis of a divine blessing. And so many have been beguiled into believing their nation is somehow blessed by God when he is cursing them. Salatzal, which was translated as whirling and hovering, is from the verbal root tasal, which speaks of quivering in fear. This, when combined with the image of loud percussive flying weapons which swarm in, armaments buzzing to destroy, paints a rather graphic picture similar, well, to the scene if you have watched the movie Apocalypse Now. Do you recall before Robert Duvall tells us that he loves the smell of napalm in the morning, that a swarm of Huey helicopter gunships, wings whirling, machine guns blazing, missiles firing, instill panic among the women and children living in a Vietnam village, collectively destroying everything in sight, all punctuated by the German March of the Valkyries blaring from their loudspeakers. If you've seen it, you know what is to come. Fast forward some 60 years, and more fearsome still, the quintessentially American Apache and Black Hawk, I should say, gunships, replete with buzzing Gatling guns, have swarmed in on whirling wings to instill fear throughout the Islamic Middle East. Yahweh did not have a word for a military helicopter at his disposal, circa 700 BCE. He was inspired to explain what he was witnessing. This Yashaya saw this vision. He actually saw the future. And so he's looking for a Hebrew word to describe what he is witnessing. It's the way prophecy works. And our future, and he used Saul at Saul, where Saul was repeated. That is to say, Saul, Saul, the likeness of something being depicted which is menacing and enormously loud, audibly and visually representing an extreme extrapolation of an inortly loud flying weapon with whirling wings swirling in and hovering overhead, percussive armaments buzzing, and missiles firing in destructive and deadly fashion. Now, we can deduce all of this because just all conveys all of these things. It conveys the image of something swarming and hovering, which is whirling and buzzing, which may include spears and harpoons, even missiles firing, all in the semblance of a reverberating sound, a shadowing appearance, a deadly consequence, as if a swarm of giant locusts causing those attacked to be adversely affected, rendered lame in many cases, stumbling and quivering in fear at the menacing sight and vibrating sound of winged and metallic implements of war hovering over them as their shadow darkens the ground beneath them. revealing the transitory nature of life. When the word is repeated as it is with ta'al, we must consider the most comprehensive and extreme extrapolation of these things. Then with sa'al modifying kanaf, wings, we are left with 4 variations of one option, each of which apply: fixed and rotary wing military aircraft, which are either piloted or drones. And speaking of flying machines, while it may have been unintended, kanaf wings is from a primitive root which conveys stealth, as to be hidden from view. Among military aircraft, this too is a quintessentially American concept, as are attack helicopters and warplanes. Irrefutably, the United States is the nation best known for its winged military prowess, and most notably, helicopter gunships. These whirling wings, Apaches and Black Hawk helicopters, swooping into lands far and wide, are etched into the world psyche. Guns clattering in Vietnam, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq. And since the terms used here remain applicable to any loud, armed, and winged military aircraft, I dare say that if I gave you the entirety of the Paleo Hebrew lexicon, you couldn't write a more apt description. Therefore, as each of the strokes that comprise this picture come into view, and they are presented one after another, the portrait will become clear as it is ominous, at least for the object of this warning. Kanaf, which describes the structure of winged appendages, such as those that are found on a bird, which are used to propel flight, conveys the insights particularly germane to the nation positioned at the biting edge of this expression of dissatisfaction. You see, kanaf addresses a distant place, located well past where the world was thought to end, as the far ends of the earth. Also, from the Israelite perspective, the swirling wings seem to come out of the extreme limits of space. These kanaf, stealthy, hidden, and secret airborne machines are capable of putting people into a corner and thrusting them aside. These are clues that we are going to consider as we more fully expand all of this narrative. Now, the next word, of course, was Asher, which was rendered as which, relationally speaking, and shows the way. It was deployed to reveal the relationship that exists between the whirling wings and the location of the place from which they will approach. And that nation is Eber, a region that is well beyond the borders of Israel, a place situated across the sea on the opposite side of the world from the promised land. It is Eber, an arrogant and haughty place, an immoral culture prone to furious outbursts and born out of an improper attitude and bias. The nation is meddling. It's a busybody with their propensity to involve itself in the affairs of others. It is filled with Hebrews, and thus has a significant Jewish population. Lastly, since the root of Eber is Abar, the people of this nation have been alienated because of their position on Passover. Eber is invalid from God's perspective, and that is why they're perishing. Now, since God is law, pointing us in the direction of something and encouraging us to view its location as a special extension towards this place, we've been given some bearings. With that in mind, the next clue, Nakari, rivers, plural, um, says that the proper bearing is either past the Tigris and Euphrates rivers or the river system found in the Nile Delta. If it were singular, we'd turn to the Jordan River, although the land most divided by rivers is the same place where the aerial warfare that we've seen depicted has become ubiquitous. The nation which seems to meet all of the criterion we've seen thus far. Now, beyond this, Na'ar speaks of traveling en masse and of a constant flow of a large number of people. So we ought to be looking for a populous nation where the citizenry travels continually and freely and where the military can project its enormous force. Although the next word is Cush. Let's table what can be known about it and what it may represent for a moment so that we can retain our focus on the land of whirling winged aircraft. After all, Cush isn't the country being warned or scolded, but instead a place that simply points us in the direction of the subject nation. Now, hovering and whirling winged aircraft, engines roaring and armaments blazing, is such a remarkable visual picture. Let's consider those implications, especially as they relate to the nation best known for producing and deploying these menacing airborne killing machines. America's first military helicopter was the Sikorsky R-4, initially flown in 1942. Between the R-4, H-5, and R-6, 650 warbirds were deployed. The U.S. quickly made the leap to spying in 1945 with the Bell H-13 Sioux, its second military helicopter. A total of 2,400 were put into service. And during the 1950s, the U.S. produced 2,000 Hiller OH-23 Ravens, 1,100 Sikorsky H-19 utility, and 707 Vertol H-21 cargo helicopters. The initial assault rotary wing warbird was the Sikorsky CH-37 Mojave, which was manufactured from 1956 through 1969. Now, this led to the first of two helicopters, which came to be emblematic of American intervention and aggression, a metaphor for the nation's loudmouth and menacing bite, symbolic of its propensity to involve itself in the affairs of others. This was the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, nicknamed the Huey, quickly becoming the world's most recognizable helicopter. It was first flown in 1959, where 16,000 were deployed, 7,000 of them used to make a bad situation worse than Vietnam, and 5,600 of those destroyed during the conflict. Well, not only is the name Bel intriguing in that it is based upon Bel, the Lord, Bel, Babel, the Lord of Babylon. They were called hogs if they carried rockets, and cobras if they were more benignly equipped with 50 caliber machine guns. They were referred to as slicks when they were used as modern cavalry, transporting troops into battle and broken bodies and corpses back from those same engagements. The UH-1 flew hunter-killer missions towards the end of the Vietnam conflict. Of the 58,220 American lives sacrificed for nothing, in Southeast Asia. 10% of them, 2,165 pilots and 2,712 crewmen, were lost flying Hueys. What we don't know is how many soldiers were escorted to their deaths in Hueys, dropped off so that they could take a hill from the Vietnamese only to surrender it back to them. Nor does the 101st Airborne keep records of the number of tormented troops flown back to camp so they could fight and die on another day. In the years that followed, 1,500 Sikorsky Sea Kings were produced, scores of them to transport U.S. presidents from the Rose Garden to Air Force One, or Air Horror One now that it's being provided by Qatar. Boeing manufactured 1,200 Chinooks, the twin rotor behemoths, beginning in 1962. The first Hughes chopper was the Cayuse, which had 1,400 entering service. The MD McDonnell Douglas MH-6 Little Bird followed, but because it was used only for special operations, the number brought into service remains classified. We don't want you to know what the government is secretly doing. The first pure attack helicopter was the Bell AH-1G Cobra, of which the Marines ordered 1,116. Bell hit a gold mine with their OH-58 Kiowa, selling 2,200 of the versatile warbirds used for observation, reconnaissance, utility, and direct fire support, according to their Model 206 Jet Ranger, with 7,300 built to carry military brass around in style. Beginning in 1979, Sikorsky introduced the first in a series of combat killing machines with the UH-60 Black Hawk and the Pave Hawk. It served as the U.S. Army's tactical support replacement for the Bell UH-1. These whirling wings were designed for electronic warfare and for special operations. They were also used for new missions and roles, including mine laying. Isn't that special? So special, apparently, that 2,700 have been deployed. And that does not include the still classified stealth variation, such as the ones deployed to assassinate the reclusive Osama bin Laden. America's baddest bird, the Boeing McDonnell Hughes AH-64 Apache, followed, entering service in 1984 with production soaring above 1,100 aircraft. While Hughes would remake 471 Defenders beginning in 1976, no one seems to know what they were used to defend. The ultimate boondoggle, the Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey, was designed in 1983 and entered service in 2007, with just 160 attempting to fly since that time. The RH-66 Comanche, the Keep America First sneaky upgrade of the killing prowess of the Apache, has had a tough time migrating the political climate shifts in Washington. So after two were produced at exorbitant costs of $6.9 billion, the stealth helicopter program was canceled. Well, in actuality, when Congress faltered, the Hawks simply applied the stealth and noise suppression technology to Sikorsky's popular UH-60 Black Hawk and have produced an undisclosed quantity. The latest disclosed killer, aptly named Venom, entered service in 2008, but fewer than 100 have been built. We are told that the Pulaski 49, an experimental high-speed compound stealth helicopter, is currently under development. All of this is to say that the United States has a veritable monopoly on whirling winged combat aircraft. Now let's bring in the drones. As of 5 years ago, the last public report, the U.S. military operated 7,400 RQ-11. These Ravens, there were 990 AeroVironment Wasp 2s or 3s, 1,137 AeroVironment RQ-20 Pumas, 306 RQ-16T Hawk UAS systems, 246 Turbine and Hellfire missile-ready Predators, and MQ-1C Gray Eagles, 126 MQ-9 Reaper Hunter Killers, which is a $17 million machine, 491 RQ-7 Shadows, also a $17 million machine, including its launch systems, and 33 RQ-4 Global Hawks, a vastly larger remotely controlled airborne drone costing just over $222 million apiece. Now, countless additional unmanned air vehicles, UAVs, have been produced by the U.S. military since this 2014 inventory was made public, and no one knows the quantity flown by America's spy agencies who have had lethal authority restored after lobbying the Trump administration for it. Moreover, the military role of unmanned aircraft systems is growing at unprecedented rates. These war machines range from a few $1,000s to hundreds of millions of dollars and weigh in at less than a pound to up to 20 tons. Drones are so prevalent that they have shifted the moral arguments surrounding war, from targeting states to killing individuals. They have also lowered the threshold for going to war, allowing nations like America to intervene almost instantly and without public or political debate or approval. Barack Obama played God with them, murdering thousands of people without so much as an indictment, a trial, or even providing any evidence that they had killed a single American. And in keeping with video games, the digitizing the sting of death, we have entered a new world, a lethal and frightening time in which body counts are the means to keep score. And do not think that they are someone else's menace, because the U.S. military has admitted and justified deploying them over U.S. cities too. Moreover, the FBI now operates a large fleet of fixed and rotary winged aircraft spying on Americans. Now, especially germane to the prophecy, the U.S. military is now equipped with Black Hornet personnel reconnaissance systems, or nano drones, with a 6-inch long body shaped like a locust. And they fly using 2 rotary wings, one for lift, the other on the tail to counter the centrifugal force of the main rotor. They sport a 1.2 mile range and fly at 13 miles an hour and can stay aloft for 25 minutes and weigh in at just 33 grams. And since almost every combat soldier will ultimately have one at their disposal, they will swarm in and hover over like locusts. Now let's deal with the enigma known as Cush. We are initially introduced to Cush as Noah's grandson through Ham. In the table of nations found in Bereshith, Genesis 10, Ham represents America and, represents Africa and Asia, while his firstborn, Cush, deprived of light, became the forefather of Babylon. Ham's other sons were Mitzrayim, denoting Egypt, Put, the progenitor of Libya, and Canaan, addressing the tribes that occupied the promised land. The deprived of light and Babylon connections are intriguing, especially since no nation better exemplifies Babylon today than America. Only the institution of Roman Catholicism is a more adroit fit. Both nations, Babylon and then America, are now the most dominant and influential of our time, both as a political and a religious entity. Now, God's request for his people to leave Babylon during the last days was first stated in Jeremiah 51:6, where we find an accusation that includes, as does this one in Yashaya 18, a woe, with ships at sea in both places, as well as an ode to military and financial influence on other nations. It reveals that the country most akin to Babylon during the time of Israel's troubles will be destroyed. And as a result of this occurring, due to its enormous wealth and seaborne trade, world leaders will mourn for them because no one buys their cargo anymore. The Yirmiyah reference is undeniably pointed towards the United States, as is the request to come out of her, my people. Since Yahweh has only one people and 7.5 million Jews, over 40% of the world's population live there, he's speaking of America. Well, now in a subsequent book, we will pursue these prophetic references so that we learn as much as is knowable on this side of these events occurring as is possible. But for now, God continues to make his case against the United States here in Yashaya 18. So be aware that this prophecy does not stand alone. And before we continue to pursue it, because there is still a lot to cover, and we've already gone well past our typical hour runtime, I'm going to bid you adieu for this session. Thank you for listening to the YAHOWAH blog as the world turns against Israel, betrays God's people, and returns Jews back to the conditions that they faced during the Holocaust. I thank you for listening.